Yeah. Fly was flying on the team. Touchdown. Time to get Jalen this ring. You don't really want to start a thing. This a Bird Gang Nation, baby. It's a Philly thing. Hater, and you looking like you type trash. I'm just here calling on Philly the podcast. And we can call a man dog or watch Miles score off the handoff. Rest of the division, your man saw Jackson like Sean, Hunting like Randolph. Season here, really time to do them in. Your boy Philly Fresco. Thanks for tuning in.
What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Joe Castro, aka Philly Fresco, and this is Philly the podcast. So today we have a very special guest. We have Sam Monson from PFF. Sam, thank you so much for your time. How you doing today, man?
Good. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So we'll hop right into this. I know you're a busy man over there, especially with combines now, getting into full swing. So I want to pick your brain a little bit about this draft and about the prospects. But before I do, I kind of want to just ask, going into these off seasons, going into these drafts and scouting, what is it you look for in players and what type of attributes are you looking, out of these young guys in the drills that are going to be coming up through this off season?
Yeah, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all kind of answer to that. I think it depends, the team depends what you're looking for, what you need, what kind of scheme you run. And realistically, you're just looking for guys that tick basic thresholds, particularly for certain positions. You want a corner that is going to run faster than 4.6. It's not the guys that run slower than 4.6 can't be successful, but it's a lot smaller of a percentage chance that they do. You're just trying to cut off those outliers and play the percentages and maximize your chance of actually hitting on a player that's going to impact your team next year and going forward. So I think ultimately with these things, the tape always gets you the most important part of what you want to see. If a guy is productive and if you can see why he's winning on tape, the workouts and those kinds of things should be nothing more than a check or a confirmation of what it is you already saw. But you shouldn't be double counting it, right? So if you're looking at a guy on tape and he's fast or he's huge or he's powerful, when he backs that up and shows you that in a combine drill or in a combine measurement, you don't kind of put a second tick there, right? It's just that confirms what you already thought. This fast guy is fast. We have it on tape. We have it on the drill. Now let's sort of be comfortable in that evaluation and let's move on.
Definitely. And like you said, a lot of people already kind of know what they know and just kind of want to reassure themselves. But going into this draft, I feel like a lot of people have their eyes on this edge rushing group and for good cause. I think there's a lot of good players at that position. But what, in your opinion, do you think is the strongest group so far that you've seen from this draft class?
Yeah, I think edge rusher probably is that group. I think there is a lot of offensive line depth as well. It's a good draft generally, I think, for players in the trenches, both offense and defensive line. I think there's a lot of cornerback depth as well, but maybe the star power isn't quite there. Depending on how high you are on a guy like Derek Stingley, maybe there aren't those sort of truly elite special prospects, whereas we're talking about, 3 offensive tackles that are all potentially in consideration at the top of the draft. We're talking about 2 edge rushers, either one of whom could go number 1 overall. Those are the positions where they have a lot of depth, but they also have those superstars at the very peak of the draft. But those are the positions. A lot of the times we get caught up in the quarterbacks and the glamour positions, but this is a draft for guys that love those impact playmakers in the trenches.
Definitely. Yeah. And as an Eagles fan, obviously this is an Eagles channel. We all love to hear that because we are built through the trenches usually, right? And we're a little bit old there. So this is a good chance for us to kind of retool that position. Now, obviously with every good, there's a bad, right? So we talked about the good, the strong position of this draft. What do you think, in your opinion, is probably the weakest position group from this draft?
I mean, the obvious one is quarterbacks, right? Where in last season, we went into a draft, and at one point we thought there might be 5 quarterbacks go in the first 6 picks. It didn't end up going that way. It went 1, 2, 3, but the top 5 QBs were all off the board by the time 15 rolled around, right? It was the top half of the first round saw 5 quarterbacks go. I don't think we're anywhere near that kind of world right now. And we're saying maybe a quarterback might not go in the top 10 at all. Maybe 2 or 3 of them go in the first round, just because that's the nature of the NFL, you need quarterbacks. You need to take a chance on these guys if you think they have any chance of becoming good. But comparing this draft class to last draft class, it's night and day. And it's one of the first groups in a long time where you don't have those couple of superstar quarterback prospects that everybody's comfortable with. And when you talk to people around here in Indy for the combine during the week, everybody is kind of saying the same thing, right? It's like, none of these guys are great. Like, teams will talk themselves into a couple of them, and maybe one even goes in the top 10 and all those kinds of things. But everybody that starts to look at these quarterbacks comes to the same kind of conclusion that, like, this is just, it's not a great year for quarterbacks.
Definitely. Yeah. And I feel like this Senior Bowl, Jermaine Johnson is a name that pops out to me just because this Senior Bowl, prior to that, I was talking highly of him. I really like the kid. Had a great Senior Bowl week, right? And then, kind of rocketed up draft boards. I bring that up to ask this. Do you see any players that might really benefit from this scouting combine, that you might think is going to kind of jump out the building or run out the building? Anybody that you got your eye on through the scouting combine to kind of up their draft stock, I should say, excuse me?
Yeah, I think there's a few guys, and a lot of them at the top of the draft as well. Like a guy like Aiden Hutchinson, I think could lock up the #1 pick potentially if he has the kind of workout that is being talked about. A lot of people sort of compared him to Kayvon Thibodeau and sort of said that Thibodeau's the more explosive, more athletically gifted guy. But actually, the more you talk to people, Hutchinson is putting up some insane workout numbers in training and those kinds of things. And he might have a crazy week that really sort of changes people's perspective on where he is as a prospect, not just a special player, but a special athlete as well, and well worthy of the #1 pick. With Evan Neal kind of taking the combine off, electing not to work out, I think that opens the door for somebody else in the offensive tackle market, and maybe a Nicky Ekwonu to have a great workout and leapfrog Evan Neal as the #1 tackle prospect in the draft, certainly temporarily, right, until Evan Neal does his pro day and potentially reclaims that title. But I think that's an opening for a guy like Ekwonu. And then Sauce Gardner, right, the Cincinnati cornerback. He's got length. He's got freakish wingspan. He didn't give up a touchdown his entire college career. And the one question mark teams have about him is, like, how fast is he, right? Like, you look at the deep speed and it doesn't look great. But if he comes out here and he clears that threshold, that cornerback threshold, if he clears it, he's good. But if he does something surprising, like if he can come out and potentially run a high 4.4, all of a sudden, I think that changes the complexion of where you would draft a guy like Sauce Gardner.
Definitely. And there's a lot of prospects in this draft. Like, obviously everybody does mock drafts, right? I'm sure you guys have done already a million. I've seen a bunch of you going even deep into the second, third round. But there's, teams like the Eagles, right? We have 3 draft picks. You look at Giants, they got a couple. You look at the do you think this is a buyer's market for draft? Would you, if you're a franchise, want multiple picks in this first round, or do you think this is a draft where you can get talent throughout the draft and maybe spread out those, maybe trade back? Do you think this is a buyer's market, seller's market? How do you see this draft going as far as the organizations kind of pulling trades off and everything?
Yeah, it's a fascinating draft because, like you said, there's multiple teams with those extra first round picks. And usually the thing that brings up is those are the picks you need to get a blockbuster trade done for a veteran quarterback, right? So with guys like Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson, these names out on the potential trade market, Deshaun Watson as well, but obviously that's more complicated with his legal problems. Those are the kind of picks you need to get that done. Now, is Philadelphia happy enough with Jalen Hurts? They're not in that market at all. Or if the price gets into their realm, their ballpark, are they willing to put together a package for somebody like Russell Wilson? So I think that's a really interesting thing to look at and see if that's on the table. And if not, those extra picks to me feel like the ability, or they feel like they give you the capacity to take some chances, right? Like you lock up what you think is a sure thing with one of your draft picks, but then with the other one, you're almost playing with house money, and you can kind of attack upside, and you can shoot for a guy that has superstar potential, but maybe is a little bit less likely or a bit more risky given some question marks, whether it's off the field, whether it's athleticism, whether it's size, whether it's injuries and durability and those kinds of things. So either way, either one of those scenarios, I think creates like really interesting times during the actual draft.
Definitely. Yeah, I think this is going to be a very fun draft, especially having 3 first-round picks. Everybody's going to love that as an Eagles fan. But I do want to ask you about a particular person, because like I said earlier, I do feel like Jermaine Johnson rocketed up boards, and a guy that kind of, I hate to say, is kind of being disrespected in my opinion, is a George Karlaftis. What's your opinion on a George Karlaftis? Because honestly, I have been picking him in some of my drafts, saying that this guy's a really, really good player, and I don't think that a lot of my audience believes me at this point. But what is your opinion on a George Karlaftis going into this draft?
Yeah, I mean, PFF loves Karlaftis. He's ranked really high on our big board right now, and I think he suffers a little bit because he's not Aiden Hutchinson, and he's not Kayvon Thibodeau, right? And those are the two guys that everybody's putting at the top of this draft from the edge rusher class, and they're the guys that are potentially going to get selected in the first couple of picks. And Karlaftis isn't quite there. But I think it's closer. He's closer to those two than he is the chasing pack. And I don't think he gets the credit for that. He does have, a wide, a varied skill set. He's got the ability to win a bunch of different ways. He's got production. He's got really good PFF grades. I think he's definitely a guy that is being slept on a little bit now.
Definitely. And how much do you throw the analytics into? Like, how important is the eye test versus the analytics? I know PFF is probably the best at the analytics side of it, but from your point of view, when you're scouting these guys, how much do you weigh the analytics, or are you more so a eye test kind of guy?
I think it depends on the position. PFF has been grading college since 2014, so the data set is getting bigger and bigger. The evidence that we have of guys translating from college to the NFL is getting larger and larger. When we first started doing this, we had this season of college grading, and we literally had no idea whether it meant anything, right? We had these guys that had incredible grades, but we had no clue how closely those grades translate to NFL production and how much you should lean on them, how important are athletic measurables and testing and thresholds and those kinds of things. Now, as we've been doing it for a while, I think we're learning where that balance is. And there are certain positions that do have a really tight correlation between, incredible college success and immediate NFL success. And edge rusher is interestingly one of those spots, right? So guys that absolutely dominate in college and put up incredible PFF pass rushing grades are immediately good players in the NFL. Guys like the Bosa brothers, guys like Myles Garrett. And, it's not like we're breaking news here. Those are really high touted prospects with or without PFF. But those guys that have incredible college grades, and not necessarily just good, but really push yourself into that elite range of the 95 type grades, those guys are very good, usually very quickly in the NFL. And that's why I think PFF is a little bit higher on Aiden Hutchinson relative to Thibodeau or relative to some other people, because Hutchinson is the one guy who really has that grading profile. His pass rush grade this year, I think, was basically right under 95. It stayed really high and against true pass sets, so you take out the screens, the quick game, those kinds of things. And he's the one guy where you look at it and you say, all right, it might not quite be Nick Bosa, it might not quite be Joey Bosa, but it's right there.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to see this class of edge rushers. I think that it's really loaded. Now, I do want to ask a little bit about Stingley. You brought him up earlier. What coming into number one guy, do you feel like that's changing at all? Do you feel like he's still that number one cornerback most likely to come off the board? What is the feel on Stingley so far, or as of late, I should say?
Yeah, I think cornerback is one of those positions where you get a very varied draft board depending on who you talk to, right? Every year, not just this year, but team to team, the list, the order is going to be different, and rightly so, right? Not everybody plays the same scheme, plays the same coverage, the same defenses. You shouldn't have the same corners in the same order, because some guys are scheme specific and don't fit in a man heavy or a zone heavy scheme or whatever it is. Stingley is an interesting case study though, because his freshman grade was crazy. It was above 90. It was one of the best grades we've ever seen. from a cornerback in college football, and it was in year one of him playing at that level in the SEC. Those are all incredibly good things to have in your favor, but he hasn't gotten back to that level, and he's been injured, and he hasn't played at the same level, and all those kinds of things. So there's is that it is volatile, and it fluctuates year to year. And I think a guy playing at that elite level is more important than when he did it, right? So the fact that we've seen Stingley play at that incredibly high level is more important than whether it was last year, because we know cornerback play fluctuates and can be good one year and bad the next year. The concern is the injury. So, if teams clear him medically and if he checks out and they're comfortable with that, then I think, yeah, absolutely, he should be an elite top-end corner. If they are concerned by the medical and scared off by that, then I think that's a slightly different issue.
Definitely. And I want to ask one more question about another cornerback from Florida. Another guy that kind of had a similar a path almost is a Elim. I felt like he was a top guy, a first-round guy. As of late, I've been seeing him in the second round. As of late, I've been seeing him dropping a little bit. What are your thoughts on Elim? Is he a guy that you look at? I look at him as a top guy. I really like Elim, but what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, there is a lot to like. He is a guy that's slipping down draft boards a bit, I think. He's another guy I think that could potentially rescue that slide or stop that slide with really impressive workout numbers. The corner is one of those positions where if guys have incredible performances in the workouts, they do matter for cornerbacks. Teams absolutely love that. And he's got that prototypical size. And this is a cornerback group where not everybody has that. You think of McDuffie from Washington. There are much smaller corners out there that some teams are not going to like. Some teams are not going to buy into that size issue. So Elim, I think, has got that. It's always a danger, like same school scouting, right? And being like, well, Florida corners haven't worked out well in recent years, so we'll just throw them all in the same bucket. But there is a little bit of a trend in terms of these guys who have all the tools, and they've played well for stretches, but it's never quite put it all together and just dominated for that full stretch of play like a Derek Stingley has. So I like him. I think he's got the tools there and could easily become a great player at the next level, but I get why teams would be scared off from him a little bit.
Definitely. And now, obviously, like I said before, we are Eagles show, so I would be remiss to not bring up quarterback, right? Obviously, Jalen Hurts is a polarizing figure in Philadelphia, but looking at this draft class, I know it's not the strongest of quarterback classes, but in your opinion, is there a player at that quarterback position that you would take a chance on if you were a franchise, and who would it be?
Yeah, if I have a desperate need for quarterback, there are guys in this draft that you can talk yourself into and might be the answer. I don't see a guy who is an obvious upgrade for Philadelphia, so I think in a way it's a good year for them it buys them cover to buy into Jalen Hurts for another year and deploy all the resources around him. And if it all goes south, you can kind of look at it and say, well, what was the alternative, right? We draft any of these other quarterbacks and throw that guy in there as competition. None of those were obvious upgrades. It's not a Josh Rosen, Kyler Murray kind of situation. But if you're a team like Denver or Carolina or Washington or one of these teams that just needs a quarterback of some kind, then yeah, I think there are guys you can talk yourself into, and it's going to be different depending on each team. I think Malik Willis is the one that I would buy into. It's not that he's a perfect prospect, but when you watch that game, Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, and you see these two superstars, phenomenally gifted, athletic, physical specimens going toe-to-toe and trading incredible plays, Malik Willis is the one guy from this draft where you can at least see that game in his range of possible outcomes. Like it might not happen. We might not even have a high chance of it happening, but it's there. I don't know if it's there for a lot of the other quarterbacks. And I think that's a big difference maker or differentiator that will cause some teams to jump on Willis in the first round somewhere.
Definitely. That kid has got an arm. I would definitely say that man has a rocket of an arm. He's a fun kid to watch. Now I got a couple more questions and then we will get you out of here. Look, going into this offseason, obviously the draft is the main focus for me, at least. There's a lot of trade rumors, right? How much do you buy into these trade rumors as far as it goes with Russell Wilson, the Deshaun Watson, the Aaron Rodgers talks, and Jimmy Garoppolo, I guess you can even throw in there. How much do you buy into this? Do you think this is going to be a wild west of an offseason where we just see a bunch of trades?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's like a dominoes game. You're going to need one domino to fall first for a couple others to move. And I think if we get the first one, we probably will get a couple of others go down as well. Jimmy Garoppolo makes some sense. San Francisco, I don't think they need to move him, but it wouldn't be a good look if they traded that amount for Trey Lance and he wasn't starting in year 2. So I think if they got an offer that was anything like acceptable, they would take it and deal Jimmy G. I can see Russell Wilson being moved. I think the dissatisfaction he has with Seattle is probably real. If he was unhappy last offseason, he's only unhappier this offseason, given the way last year went. And for the first time, I think Seattle are probably looking at that and saying, you know what, Russell on his own isn't good enough to take this team to a Super Bowl anymore. So we actually need to do work. And I don't know if we can put the team around Russ that'll take us to where we need to go. So let's cash in and let's try and rebuild this thing from the ground up without Russell Wilson. So I can see him being moved. The one I don't think necessarily happens is Aaron Rodgers. I don't see a great place for him to land that makes more sense than him staying in Green Bay. I think the Packers are in a similar situation in that they would desperately, they know that if they don't have him, they're in trouble as well. So it just makes too much sense for both sides for him to stay there.
Definitely. That would be crazy to see him move in, to see, Deshaun, all these pieces moving. Growing up watching the NFL, I feel like the whole NFL has changed now. It's a whole new landscape. So that would just be the cherry on the top, right? Now going back a little bit to the draft real quick, what do you think position group wise are you most interested to see going into this combine? What group are you having your eyes most closely on?
I'm really interested in the wide receiver group. It's another good year, I think, for wide receivers. I think that's probably going to be the case pretty much every year, given just how important they are in college football and how many players are going to be coming to the league every year. But they're a very diverse group in terms of body shape, in terms of play style, in terms of speed, size, all those kinds of things. So I'm really fascinated to see where all that lands. Like how fast does a guy like Treylon Burks run at his size? How do those Ohio State guys run? Chris Olave is supposedly the faster of the two. I think Garrett Wilson is the better receiver, but how close is the speed and the athleticism between those two guys? And then, same thing as you go down the draft. There are guys, I think, that are very good prospects, but are potentially not athletic superstars. Can one of those guys put a different number on in their workouts that makes teams start to reassess how good they are? Because the tape is there for a lot of these guys, but there's that lingering feeling that, they might not be as athletically gifted as some of these other receivers, and that will cause them to drop. But those are the kinds of players that teams take in the second and third round that end up being like phenomenal NFL steals because we overrated how important the 40 time was.
Definitely. I'm excited for this draft. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Like I said earlier, I think this combine is going to be a lot of fun to watch. Obviously, we're getting into the thick of things now. But Sam, before I do let you go, I want to kind of give you the floor. If I'm not mistaken, you have a charity competition going on, if I'm not mistaken. If you want to tell the people where they can help you, how they can help you with that.
Yeah, we raise money for charities using the PFF podcast right now. Me and Steve have dueling, competing charity drives. So my one is raising money for a group called Sunshine Kids that does sort of events and group activities for kids with cancer and helps them sort of feel like kids again, not as sick people battling an awful disease. So if we raise money for that, I have to recreate a Jackson Mahomes TikTok dance. So if you go to my pinned tweet, you've got it there in the graphic at PFF_Sam on Twitter. You can raise money on the GoFundMe there and force me to have to do something ridiculous.
That's what I want to see. That's right. That's the main reason. Obviously, I wanted to give you the opportunity to, plug that, but I definitely got to see that Jackson Mahomes dance, man. But Sam, I appreciate your time so much, man. This was a lot of fun, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
No problem, man. Have a great one, brother.
You too.
So that was Sam Monson from PFF. That was a lot of fun, man. That was a lot of fun. I'm excited for this draft. I think that he gave us some good things to watch out for, some good things to definitely keep an eye on. But I am going to get out of here. I'll probably have a video coming out a little bit later today. But you guys know what it is, man. It is Fly Eagles Fly, and we are out here. Peace!
Scott with the Philadelphia
John
Eagles.
Dornbos here, the Philadelphia Eagles.
Edwards of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Follow my guy Joe Castro on his YouTube/podcast channel.
Let's give a shout out to the Philly podcast.
And shout out Philly and my guy Joe Castro. So keep on doing great things, guys. Fly Eagles Fly.
Fly Eagles Fly.
Go Birds.